World War II's strangest victory didn't start with a battle. It started with a typo. One exhausted clerk at Bletchley Park hit the wrong key and accidentally exposed a Nazi convoy sailing through the Arctic. A single mistake that proved one terrifying truth. In the age of machines, humanity's greatest weapon was still its flaws. Inside Bletchley Park, the nerve center of Britain's secret war against the Enigma, perfection was worshipped like doctrine. Every letter mattered. Every keystroke could save or sink a convoy. In one of its code-breaking huts, known only as Hut 8, Britain's brightest minds worked around the clock to decipher the encrypted messages of Hitler's navy, the Kriegsmarine. There, amid the rattle of teleprinters and the cold hum of the bombs, a nervous clerk pressed the wrong key. And the Nazis' most secure naval secret came spilling out. No spy, no sabotage, just a flicker of human imperfection powerful enough to pierce the German war machine. Hugh Alexander, the quiet, analytical mathematician who led Hut 8 after Alan Turing, noticed something strange. The day's decoded coordinates didn't match the pattern of known convoy movements. The typist's mistake had produced an impossible location, coordinates that shouldn't exist in any German naval grid. Most would have dismissed it, but Alexander didn't. He ordered the analysts to trace it. Under the dim light of gas lamps, they spread the data across tables. Something about the error shimmered with irregularity, the kind that shouldn't happen unless someone somewhere had changed the system. If Enigma's format had shifted or a signal group was reused, it could mean the Germans had modified their cipher schedule, or that a convoy was moving under new cover. Either way, the stakes were enormous. The tension inside Hut 8 deepened. Fingers tapped nervously on wooden desks. Cigarette smoke hung low in the air as clerks double-checked messages by hand. Each letter, each number, each pulse of ink might hide meaning. The typo suddenly became the focal point of argument. Half of the team claiming it was noise, the other half sensing a pattern too precise to ignore. In wartime code-breaking, perfection was a myth. Patterns were fragile and chaos was their compass. The irony was cruel. Britain's most brilliant minds trained to hunt order often found salvation in error. And this time one misaligned key would open a door no one knew existed. As dawn crept over Buckinghamshire, fog rising off the frozen lawns, the discovery began to solidify. The altered coordinates didn't lead to confusion. They led to clarity. Somewhere north of Norway, German naval activity had shifted. A convoy route, newly encrypted, newly protected. The mistyped signal had tripped an invisible wire, exposing the edge of a secret network the Kriegsmarine thought impenetrable. Inside Hut 8, a sense of unease replaced triumph. Was this luck, fate, or the system itself revealing its cracks under pressure? No one could say. But something had changed. A subtle current in the river of code, flowing toward an unknown confrontation far beyond the safety of Bletchley's walls. Outside, the wind howled through the elms. The clerk, unaware of what her trembling fingers had unleashed, filed the next page without a glance. The hum of the bombs continued in the background, as if the machines themselves sensed what was coming. Long before that typo, Bletchley Park had already become the silent heart of Britain's war. A battlefield of logic and nerve where no guns fired and yet victory or defeat hung in every sequence of letters. It was called Station X, though few outside its fences knew it existed. Surrounded by tranquil gardens and brick cottages, it looked nothing like the front lines of global conflict. Yet inside, hundreds worked night and day to breach the mind of the German war machine. By 1942, the stakes had reached their peak. The Battle of the Atlantic was bleeding the Allies dry. German U-boats prowled the ocean, their wolf packs cutting the supply arteries between North America and Britain. Convoys carrying fuel, food, and ammunition vanished beneath the waves faster than they could be replaced. Every ship lost meant soldiers stranded, factories starved, and cities left in darkness. Hut 8 was the nerve center for breaking the Kriegsmarine's naval enigma, the most complex of all cipher systems. Each machine, operated by German radio officers aboard submarines and command ships, rotated through millions of key settings every day. To read a single message, Bletchley's analysts needed both speed and intuition. The bombs, electromechanical decoders designed by Alan Turing and his team, were their weapons. They didn't solve Enigma. They hunted for its weaknesses. But even Bombi struggled when the Germans changed their cipher procedure. And by early 1942, the enemy had done exactly that. New rotors, new plugboard configurations. It was as if the codebreakers were suddenly fighting blindfolded. The pressure was suffocating. Sleepless analysts pored over endless intercepts searching for anything, a repeated letter, a reused call sign, an out-of-place phrase that might expose a pattern. They called it cribbing, guessing fragments of plain text hidden within the noise. Some nights it worked, most nights it didn't. Amid this daily storm of frustration, the mistyped Enigma intercept arrived, a slip of the hand buried in thousands of lines of traffic. Its coordinates clashed with a known convoy log, setting off a spark of curiosity. One error among millions suddenly glowed like a flare in the dark. For the team, it was a strange kind of hope. War had taught them that truth often emerged from the margins, from mistakes, half-decoded signals, or human quirks that machines could never replicate. The line between order and coincidence blurred, and somewhere in that blur lay the path to victory. Late that night, operators gathered around a table covered in printouts. The air was dense with tobacco smoke and tension. The crackle of Morse signals still echoed from the receiver rooms as they compared coordinate chains by hand. Then, as patterns aligned, realization dawned. The Germans were repositioning a major supply convoy under new cipher cover. The route was shifting north. No one cheered. No one spoke loudly. The room filled with the quiet gravity of discovery, the sense that once again chance had outpaced calculation. The invisible war continued, fought not with bullets but with brilliance, fatigue, and the fragile perfection of human error. Every piece of history we uncover brings the past a little closer. If you'd like to keep exploring these hidden moments with us, hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell. Your support keeps these stories alive. The coordinates pointed north, toward waters few Allied crews dared to cross. It was early March 1942, and the Arctic routes had become a frozen artery of the war, where convoys like PQ and QP carried munitions, oil, and hope between Britain and the Soviet Union. Above those black freezing waters, the sky was a curtain of ash. Storms raged without mercy. Ships iced over until even their gun turrets froze solid. Yet somewhere beneath that chaos, German destroyers and submarines were hunting. Inside Bletchley Park, the analysts stared at the decoded intercepts. The message fragment recovered from the typo pointed to grid square AE 459, north of Trondheim, an area previously dormant in the Kriegsmarine's logs. The British Admiralty had no recent intelligence there. No convoy expected, no scheduled patrols. Yet Luftwaffe weather traffic and U-boat radio bursts, when cross-referenced with the anomaly, began forming an unmistakable pattern. Something large was moving through the ice. The evidence spread across maps pinned to the walls. Red strings traced coded designations, each marking a suspected ship. Someone whispered the unspoken conclusion: a supply convoy bound for the Arctic coast. If true, it carried equipment critical to the Eastern Front, and striking it could cripple Germany's logistical link to Norway. But to act on an accident, that was another matter entirely. At the Western Approaches Command in Liverpool, the data reached naval intelligence under a cloud of doubt. The decrypt summary included a note: coordinates derived from signal irregularity, clerical. A polite phrase that really meant, this might be nonsense. Yet Commander Roger Wynne, head of the U-boat tracking room, had learned long ago that strange leads sometimes hid extraordinary truths. He ordered his officers to cross-check the data against U-boat movement patterns from intercepted weather signals. The results startled everyone. One U-boat, U-403, had broadcast a weather update unusually far north days earlier. Another, U-586, had been reassigned without reason to an Arctic patrol. Both pointed to the same zone the erroneous signal described. The odds of coincidence were vanishingly small. Meanwhile, in London, the Air Ministry confirmed increased Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights over the Norwegian coast. The puzzle pieces were snapping together, not cleanly, but with the uneasy logic of wartime intelligence. Something was there, hiding in the storm. As the hours passed, the map in Hut 8 transformed into a storm of ink and numbers. Lines of Morse code translations blurred under pencil smudges. The tension was palpable. Could a single miskeyed Enigma character truly unveil a convoy? Every analyst in the room felt the gravity of the decision pressing down. If they were wrong and the Royal Navy acted, hundreds of sailors could die in frozen seas for nothing. Outside, snow began to fall over Buckinghamshire. The blackout curtains fluttered with each gust of wind, shadows stretching across the tables. Inside that small world of secrets, one clerk's mistake had turned into a riddle that reached across continents. A human tremor had disrupted a mechanical perfection. And now, men and machines alike strained to decide whether to trust it. By dawn, the verdict came. The Admiralty would take the risk. Orders went out to the home fleet. Prepare for possible interception near Tromsø. The Arctic waters would soon boil with steel and fire. It began with static. At 01:12 on March 6, 1942, a faint radio pulse cut through the Arctic storm. A German transmission intercepted by the Y service outpost in Scotland. Within minutes, Bletchley Park confirmed it. The convoy existed. The coordinates matched the phantom location that the mistyped Enigma message had first suggested. The impossible was real. In a darkened Admiralty war room, officers gathered around a cold map table. Codenamed Operation Biting Wind, the response would be immediate. 2 destroyers, HMS Onslow and HMS Oribe, part of the 17th destroyer flotilla, would intercept the convoy off the Norwegian coast. No air cover. No margin for error. Just radar, discipline, and trust in the strange mathematics of an accident. The Arctic night was a void. Waves rose higher than buildings, crashing into steel hulls coated in frozen salt. Men on deck fought both the sea and the wind, hacking at the ice that crept up the gun mounts. Each breath froze in their lungs. They didn't know the origin of their mission, only that somewhere ahead, a German convoy was threading through the storm. Radar contact came just before 02:30. 10 echoes appeared, faint and scattered. Merchant ships moving in tight formation, escorted by destroyers. The British commanders made the call. Attack. At 02:47, the first torpedo left its tube. A plume of fire erupted through the snow, lighting up the night like a signal flare. The sea turned violent. One German freighter, Belgrano, took a direct hit and split in 2. Another Turing went down minutes later. Panic rippled across the German radio net, frantic SOS messages flooding the ether. At Bletchley, listening posts recorded the chaos in real time. Clerks leaned over their receivers as the airwaves filled with fear. But even in victory, something dark stirred beneath the surface. The intercepts revealed more than sinking ships. They showed awareness. The Germans were already asking questions. How had the British known the convoy's position so precisely? It was a question that chilled everyone at Bletchley Park. The triumph they had achieved through a moment of human imperfection might now risk everything. As dawn broke over the Norwegian sea, the wreckage of Belgrano and Turingen burned beneath the pale northern light. HMS Onslow and Oribe withdrew under radio silence, vanishing into fog and spray. They had struck hard, fast, and left no trace of their origin. Officially, the Admiralty credited routine patrol success. Unofficially, The intelligence that guided them would remain buried deep within classified files marked ultra-secret. Back in Hut 8, the clerks continued their endless rhythm, typing, decoding, transcribing. No celebrations, no fanfare. Only the quiet hum of machines and the unspoken weight of what had just happened. A single mistyped letter had pulled a thread that unraveled an entire German operation. But even as the echoes of the victory spread through naval command, whispers began circulating among the analysts. Would the Germans notice? Would they tighten their ciphers? Every intercepted transmission now carried the taste of risk. The line between brilliance and exposure had never felt thinner. In the end, the Arctic Sea swallowed its secrets as it always did. The convoy that should have vanished into snow became a ghost story, one born not from design but from error. A reminder that even in the age of machines, the fate of empires could hinge on the trembling hands of a clerk. And a single wrong key struck in the dark. Inside Bletchley Park, the celebration was short-lived. Word of the convoy's destruction had barely reached the Admiralty before a new silence settled over Hut 8. The success was undeniable. The first time a Kriegsmarine convoy had been struck so far north, guided purely by intelligence. Yet every analyst knew the danger that came with brilliance. For every victory drawn from Ultra, the Germans grew a little more suspicious. The codebreakers called it the price of discovery. They lived on a knife's edge, between the hunger for progress and the fear of being found out. The Germans could never learn that their Enigma system was compromised. If they did, the entire Allied advantage would collapse overnight. The secrecy around Ultra was so absolute that even the ships guided by its intelligence rarely knew where their orders truly came from. Alan Turing and Commander Edward Travis met in quiet urgency after the Arctic strike. The reports from the Y service showed that Kriegsmarine radio activity had dropped sharply. Some feared it was routine radio discipline. Others suspected the worst, that the Germans had realized something was amiss. Travis issued an order that bordered on paranoia but was necessary for survival. Any irregularities, any anomalies, were to be buried, not discussed. Even the typist whose mistake had started the chain of events was told nothing of its outcome. Meanwhile, Hut 8 labored under an invisible pressure. Fatigue carved hollow faces. The constant drone of bombs filled the air like the heartbeat of a sleepless giant. The operators, mostly young women in uniform skirts and heavy headphones, worked shifts so long that some forgot what daylight looked like. Cigarette smoke clung to the rafters, and every message printed in purple ink carried the scent of ink and oil. In one corner, the decoding clerk sifted through the new traffic. Still dense, still dangerous. They could feel a subtle shift in tone within the German messages. Transmission structures changed. Repetition patterns disappeared. What had once seemed predictable was now laced with unpredictability. The war of codes had entered a new phase, and Bletchley's edge was narrowing. For the mathematicians, it was a crisis of faith. The enemy wasn't a man or a fleet. It was an evolving system, cold and mathematical. And it was learning. The morale in Hut 8 wavered. The analysts whispered among themselves about the typo case, as it was half-jokingly, half-fearfully called. They knew what it represented, a miracle that might never repeat. One human slip had uncovered a convoy, a fluke that no algorithm could reproduce. Yet it was also a warning that intelligence was as fragile as the hands that created it. The Admiralty, cautious of any hint that ultra-intelligence existed, credited the victory to routine Arctic patrol. The world outside would never know. Even the Royal Navy officers who risked their lives in that ambush were told it was a coincidence of radar and luck. Inside Bletchley, the silence became a burden heavier than exhaustion. The people who shaped the war's outcome would remain its ghosts. As weeks turned into months, Kriegsmarine traffic became less predictable. A new variant of Enigma was introduced, a 4-rotor model reserved for submarines. The change sent ripples of dread through Bletchley Park. Every machine setting, every mechanical rhythm they had memorized, became obsolete overnight. The clerks started double and triple checking their work. Supervisors scrawled notes across ledgers. No mistakes this time. The irony was bitter. The one mistake that had given them victory now haunted them as a reminder of what was forbidden. Human error had once opened a window into the enemy's mind. Now it had to be eliminated completely. In the heart of Hut 8, surrounded by machines that spun without pause, the codebreakers began to feel less like people and more like extensions of the system they served. The war demanded perfection. But somewhere deep inside they all knew perfection had never won them anything. The next tremor came quietly. On April 2, 1942, a new intercept arrived from a Kriegsmarine base near Bergen, Norway. The code group, a sequence of letters and numbers buried in the day's traffic, was almost identical to the one that had triggered the earlier Arctic revelation. The analysts froze. Could lightning strike twice? Among those reviewing the data was Margaret Rock, the same clerk whose slip had set history in motion. Her fingers hovered over the typewriter keys, replaying the rhythm of that night weeks earlier. Rock was no ordinary typist. She was a trained cryptanalyst under Alan Turing's supervision, known for her precise attention to linguistic nuance. She had learned to hear code like music, to feel the cadence of letters that hinted at meaning beneath chaos. The intercept looked familiar, yet off-key, like a song played slightly out of tune. Rock noticed something no machine could, a repeated phrase structure common in German naval phrasing but subtly misplaced. To others it was random noise. To her it pulsed with intent. She marked it for deeper analysis, writing a quiet note in the margin. Possible convoy redirection. Check syntax variation. That margin note ignited a new chain of study. Analysts compared Rock's flagged transmission with hundreds of others across the Y-service archives. Slowly, a pattern emerged. Multiple U-boat groups were converging near Narvik. Luftwaffe weather signals mirrored the same coordinates. It was a mosaic that only human intuition could piece together. Fragments joined not by logic alone, but by feel. The bomb machines hummed endlessly, translating mathematical chaos into probable key settings. But as brilliant as the machines were, they depended on human perception to start the search. Every bomb required a crib, a guessed phrase believed to appear somewhere in the encrypted message. It was Rock's margin note that became that crib. Within hours, one of Turing's bombs clattered to a halt, revealing a partial key match. The revelation was startling. The Germans were shifting a new Arctic convoy under heavy escort, this time transporting radar components and optical rangefinders to the Luftwaffe bases along the northern coast. Once again, Bletchley had found the needle in the storm. But unlike before, this wasn't chance. Rock's insight had been deliberate, the fusion of instinct and machinery. In her ability to see meaning in the meaningless, the analyst saw something profound. Human reasoning behaving like an algorithm before algorithms existed. She didn't compute, she perceived. By April 5th, reconnaissance flights confirmed her suspicion. Near Narvik, a cluster of ships moved exactly as predicted. Intelligence passed quietly to the Admiralty, and once again the Royal Navy acted, swift, silent, unseen. When word came that the convoy had been struck, there was no cheering, no relief. Only a quiet acknowledgement that something fundamental had changed in how war was fought. The bombs were evolving, yes, but so were the people who fed them. Machine precision and human instinct were no longer rivals. They had become one organism, a new kind of intelligence born from pressure, exhaustion, and desperation. In the years to come, Margaret Rock's work would be forgotten outside declassified archives. But in that spring of 1942, she had proven something extraordinary, that the human mind, when pushed beyond reason, could think like the very machines it had created. And in that moment the war of codes became something far greater than arithmetic. It became the birth of the human algorithm. By the closing months of 1942, Bletchley Park's war had entered a new invisible phase. The victories it achieved rippled across oceans, unseen and uncredited. Convoys were safer. U-boat ambushes were fewer. Yet none of those who saved thousands of lives could speak a word of how it happened. Silence had become their duty, their armor, and their curse. The typist who had made the fateful mistake, Margaret Rock, continued her work in the naval section. Her name appeared nowhere in the official logs of victory. There were no commendations, no interviews, no medals. In a place built on secrecy, anonymity was the only honor. She typed as she always had, calm and precise, her face expressionless under the pale glow of the desk lamps. Few around her knew that she had once changed the course of the Arctic War by accident. Outside Bletchley, Britain braced under the relentless toll of global conflict. In North Africa, the desert battles raged. In the Atlantic, U-boats still prowled, though now less freely, their confidence shaken. And in the quiet countryside of Buckinghamshire, codebreakers fought exhaustion and mathematics. Each day began with the shrill sound of the teleprinter and ended long after midnight with numb fingers and ink-stained wrists. The war of minds had grown colder, harder, and lonelier. The four-rotor Enigma, the new version used by the Kriegsmarine, had arrived. It was faster, deadlier, and far more complex. For months it blocked Bletchley's progress like a locked iron gate. Messages piled up indecipherable, while Allied shipping losses began to rise again. The brief window of advantage born from one human error was closing. Turing and his team threw everything they had into adapting the bombs for the new cipher. The machines grew louder, faster, more intricate, their mechanical hearts spinning through endless possibilities. Yet behind every click and clatter stood the human element. Rows of tired analysts, their intuition guiding the machines toward truth. For every hour the bombies searched, a mind had to point them in the right direction. Margaret Rock's insight, her instinct for irregularity, became quietly legendary inside the walls of Hut 8. Her colleagues studied her methods without ever acknowledging her by name. They called it rock logic, the idea that intuition, not mathematics, often cracked the uncrackable. She had shown them that a pattern wasn't always found in precision. Sometimes it lived in the anomalies. By December 1942, the balance was shifting again. The Kriegsmarine grew wary but not omniscient. The Allies continued to strike convoys with uncanny precision, careful never to act too often, lest the enemy suspect. Every intercepted message carried a choice: act and risk discovery or wait and risk defeat. It was a terrible calculus, the ethics of intelligence. In the hidden corridors of Hut 8, even victory began to feel like guilt. To the outside world, Bletchley Park remained a rumor. The locals called it the country house for clerks. No one knew that inside those walls the most secret war of all was being waged. One fought with paper, pencils, and nerves of steel. The people there were ghosts in real time, their triumphs destined to sleep beneath 30 years of silence. And so the story of the typo convoy slipped into myth. It was never mentioned in reports or lectures. The file was sealed, stamped ultra-secret, and buried among thousands of others. The only trace of its existence lived in the memories of those who had seen a clerical accident unravel an empire's coded web. For them it remained a quiet legend, a reminder that brilliance and chance were never enemies but twins, born of the same fragile human hand. When the war ended in August 1945, Bletchley Park emptied as quietly as it had operated. The machines were dismantled, their parts scattered or destroyed. The huts fell silent for the first time in 6 years. Those who had served inside them were bound by the Official Secrets Act, forbidden to speak, even to their families, about what they had done. For decades, the names of the codebreakers vanished into anonymity. Their work remained untold, their victories invisible. Among them was Margaret Rock. She returned to civilian life without ceremony, taking a modest clerical job in London. To her neighbors, she was simply another office worker, polite and unremarkable. Yet deep within the archives of history, her keystroke still pulsed. a ghostly signature on one of the war's most improbable triumphs. For years, no one outside the intelligence community would know that a single mistyped letter in 1942 had reshaped the war's Arctic front. When the Ultra files were finally declassified in the 1970s, historians began piecing together the mosaic of Bletchley Park's hidden war. Among the debriefs and signal logs lay a small notation: errant key, Naval Convoy AE-459, March 1942. It was a single line in an ocean of data, but it told a story that stunned scholars. A clerical slip, cross-checked by analysts, had exposed a German convoy's exact location. The event had never been repeated. It was unique, a one-in-a-million convergence of human instinct and systemic error. To modern readers, it may sound like luck, but to those who had lived it, it was something deeper. The war had taught them that victory was rarely neat. It was not only machines or strategy that decided history, but the unpredictable current of human nature, the capacity to notice what others overlooked, to question the expected, to see meaning in imperfection. The typo Convoy became a symbol, not of error but of the strange marriage between chaos and calculation. In an age obsessed with precision, it whispered an unsettling truth: that the very flaws of humanity could be its greatest strength. Even in the digital era, the legacy of Bletchley Park endures. Every algorithm, every intelligence network, every cryptographic system carries a piece of that wartime DNA, a fusion of logic and intuition, first glimpsed in those cold huts under blackout skies. Margaret Rock never spoke of her contribution, but the lineage of her accidental discovery lives on in every form of modern signal intelligence. Decades later, as historians walk through the restored grounds of Bletchley Park, the air still hums faintly with echoes of typewriters, of Morse, of the quiet rhythm of thought that once altered the course of the war. Somewhere among the old walls, the ghost of that moment remains. A typist's trembling hand, a wrong letter pressed, a convoy revealed. It was not luck. It was not perfection. It was the human touch, fragile, fallible, and in that fleeting instant unstoppable. One wrong letter, one right discovery, an accident that exposed a convoy and in doing so, revealed the secret heart of victory. If you've made it this far, you're one of us, searching for the truth behind the headlines and the courage behind the silence. Subscribe to the channel, and let's keep exploring the hidden wars, secret operations, and untold fates that shape the world we live in.